Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us here on the premiere of our podcast with Marisa S White, who is currently in our exhibition, The Idol's Story, which will be showing through August 23rd. Make sure to stop by the gallery and check it out. Marisa is an award-winning artist, and I'm so glad that she is joining us here today to talk about two of the works that she has in the exhibition and her process as well. So, Marisa, if you can introduce yourself a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. So, like you said, my name is Marisa S. White. I consider myself a photographer, but really it's the photography or the photograph is really a tool to what I do. I create photo montages, which is essentially combining multiple photographs together to create a whole new kind of constructed scene, if you will. Currently live in St. Louis, Missouri. We moved here maybe 2.5 months ago with my husband, who I refer to as Dr. Awesome, and our two rescue dogs.
So, if you don't mind, let's go right into the questions. Like I said, I'm a big fan of your work. I really do enjoy surrealism and I love anything photography wise. So, seeing someone that can do photo montages so seamlessly is really exciting. What was it that drew you to create these images that feel like they're from a different world?
Well, thank you. Yeah, great question. Perhaps it's this innate need to still believe in magic in some way or another, to still feed my inner child with things that excite and wonder, and the belief that we are more than just this body living in this physical space. I do a lot of art festivals, and when children come into my booth, it's just so much fun to sit there and watch them because they're often laughing and squealing and pointing. And sometimes you get the occasional one that will be looking in disbelief, like, this isn't possible, or what's going on here, or this isn't real. That's my favorite question. Like, is this real? And it's like, well, what does real mean to you? Is it real in the sense of like, yes, I did actually physically photograph this particular animal. So yes, in that sense is real, but they're not asking the right questions either. So anyway, it's kind of a fun experience, especially to engage with the younger group that haven't lost that belief in Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny yet and still believe in magic.
So, it's a way to still capture this magic in the world then.
And within ourselves too.
That's wonderful. And that's exciting to hear. I do want to ask, do you feel like the adults seem to enjoy your work just fine, or do they react kind of like the little kids in disbelief, like, oh, this is not real? Or do they just enjoy going into that fantasy moment and enjoying that magic?
Well, the answer to that question is yes. Yes, I'll get the group of people that come in, and everybody has their own flavor of art anyway, right? So those that either don't really prescribe to photography or anything that's not realistic, they'll just keep walking, and that is perfectly fine because that's the subjectivity of art, right? But then I will have a lot of other people come in, and they'll have big smiles on their faces, and sometimes they'll have their hand over their heart, and I just look at them, and sometimes I just let them go, and other times, if they look at me, I'll ask them, it's like, well, what is it that you're feeling? And the response often is, I don't know, but it feels good. And so there's that really lovely connection in that way. It is emotional. It's a little bit of a visceral response. So that is always lovely. And then other times I'll get people that are a little bit more technically inclined and they're very complimentary, or they're questioning, is this real? Did you capture this in real time? You've got a tiger sitting on a bed here. How is that possible? And then it's kind of fun to share the process. But again, going back to that question, is this real? It's like, well, what's real?
Before we touch on your process, can you tell me when was it that you started falling in love with photography? And specifically, when was it that you first became interested in using surrealism?
So I grew up in Houston, Texas, and I've always been involved in art ever since I was little. I grew up in a family full of scientists too, so I'm kind of the odd duck out, if you will. Always drawing and painting when I was little, and I remember being taken to the Menil collection in the art district downtown Houston, and they hosted one of the largest collections of Rene Magritte paintings that I had seen, and mixed in with a few others. Really fascinating artworks. There was just something about it that just appealed to this sensibility in me, and it's really kind of hard to articulate it. maybe it just goes back to that whole belief of something greater than ourselves. And here it was being expressed in a very visual way, and a way that it was trying to articulate and explain something that we innately know. But I was fascinated with that since the get-go. And so all the works, especially even when I was in high school and college, were a little bit more off the wall, a little bit more surreal in nature. The photography part did come a little bit later. I initially went to school. I have actually a drawing and painting degree at the University of North Texas. It was when I was required to take a photography class in college and was introduced to the dark room and completely fell in love with it. There was like a whole seduction of being in the dark and magic. You know, magic is obviously a common theme for things that I talk about, but being able to go in there and to, with all these chemicals in the dark, you know, have an image just appear on a piece of paper was so fascinating. And then being able to kind of manipulate that, and you couldn't get me out of the dark room. And I ended up staying in college a whole semester longer, taking more photography classes. And at that point, I would say all my work started becoming more mixed media collage with a lot of photographic elements to it. That's a love affair and how that began with photography. And then to go on a little step further, I was actually a purist for a really long time, having been brought up in the dark room. And so when digital came out, I kind of shunned it for a long time, thinking like, no, this isn't real photography. And I'm just like slapped myself for saying that now. I got my first digital SLR camera in 2010, and then really fully dove in and embraced the digital side in 2012 when I went to the Rocky Mountain School of Photography in Missoula, Montana. And that's where I kind of learned the ins and outs, and they showed us how to use the software programs. And to be honest, I kind of at that point thought I was going to be a little bit more of just maybe a portrait photographer or a lifestyle photographer. But we had this one class with a commercial photographer, and he told us how to fully create an image. Let's say if you're working for a client and you have 3 or 4 different models, but they can't all be there at the same time. So this is how you would set it up. You need to have this vision in advance of what it's going to look like, where all the placement's going to be. You need to have the lighting everywhere and have that consistent across the board. So that way, when the models come in, you can snap that photo, and then you can then go back into the software and layer it together. So when I figured out how to do that, it was like the light bulb went off. Everything that's in my head now, I know how to create it. And so that was kind of that pivotal point, that epiphany, if you will, where everything changed for me. And I've been creating this kind of work ever since.
Do you ever go back to doing work in a dark room, or do you miss it?
There are aspects of it that I do miss, but I also, even though there's like some nostalgia to the whole chemical smell, chemicals and me do not go very well together anymore. And I get a massive headache just even being around somebody that smokes. So I just, it's probably safer to not do that. But I did get to dabble again with a film camera the other day, and I still need to send the film off just to get it processed and see what I can play with on that front. But that was a lot of fun, and had not done that in a very long time.
Well, I'm excited to see what comes out of you going back to the film cameras. And can you walk us a little bit through the process now of your photo montages? Like, do you start with an idea, or does the meaning come in later? How do you build them up?
So that answer is also yes. So there are some ideas that really kind of get rooted in my brain, and who knows where they come from. They just sometimes just pop in. Sometimes I refer to things like all your great ideas come into while you're in the shower, like referring to it as shower wisdom, where your mind is just allowed to explore, and then things will kind of pop in. And so for in those instances, then I'll usually start writing stuff down just so I don't completely lose it. And if I don't already have the photographs in play in my library, which honestly I'm closing in on 100,000 photographs, my library of images that I have taken over the course of however many years, it's ridiculous. But that's not to say that I don't always have what I need. So then I will often go out and try to either grab a model or use myself if I don't have a model in play, if I just have an idea that's bursting to get out, and take the different elements needed to pull everything together. That's to say, too, that if I do have something, it could be from, I don't know, several years ago, and I'll go organize things in a certain way within my library where I can go back to them fairly quickly if need be. Or it's the scavenger hunt in my brain, like, okay, this happened this year about this time of year because the flowers were blooming or whatever it may be. And so I will play with that quite a bit. But then there's the other side where, let's say I don't know what I'm doing and I know I need to do something. Was it Chuck Close that had this famous quote that talks about inspiration is for amateurs? And I look at that and I laugh at that because yes, okay. All that to say, and I think inspiration and motivation maybe go hand in hand within that quote. But in those moments where we don't know what we're doing or we're not feeling inspired or motivated to create something, it's like, all right, well, let's just dive in and just see what we can come up with. And so I call those kind of the moments of play. Like I'll look at what I've got in my library. I will just start taking different images and, doing a really rough, crude edit and dropping them in just to see what it looks like, if it makes sense, what the juxtaposition is, what am I even trying to say? Sometimes I don't even worry about that. And then I just start to kind of play. And eventually something just kind of takes over and everything starts to come together in that way too. And then often it'll tell me what it means afterwards, which I also find very interesting.
I feel like that's what I hear the most from artists. Like sometimes you have an idea and you go with it, and sometimes you make and then you figure out where it says. I know that earlier you were talking about magic and how that has informed your work, but I do want to talk a little bit about how spirituality seems to inform your work.
Yeah, it's definitely an underlying theme across several bodies of work that I've created. I look at more of kind of a modern day spiritual approach to life, and not just like what perhaps other people envision of us just sitting in nature meditating, but recognizing that we are something a lot greater than ourselves. Call it whatever you want. It goes by many different names. I like to call it the universe or the all in that sense, but that there is something larger at work over our existence. And so for me, that has me going down a lot of existential rabbit holes, if you will, wondering things like why are we here? What is our purpose in life? What is particle entanglement? Noticing like repeating patterns that exist out in nature, the Fibonacci sequence or the golden ratio, thinking about different dimensions and wondering how we can actually visit other dimensions than the third one that we kind of live in. If how are we able to bilocate into them? These are again some really crazy thoughts and different ideas. But also like wondering, hey, where do we go when we dream or when we pray or meditate or when we die? And then as of late too, I don't know if you've heard about this podcast that's come out called the telepathy tapes, but that has been really fascinating. It's kind of more geared in line with psi phenomenon, and talking about how non-speaking autistic children have
Oh
found a way to
yeah.
communicate telepathically. So if you start listening to those podcasts, they are kind of opening the door for this recognition and of that there is this really massive connectedness that is underlying everything. And it's stuff that all the scientists are talking about. It's super, super fascinating. Um, it just goes to show that there's so much more out there that we don't understand. But as it starts to come out more and more, there's going to be this huge paradigm shift that exists in all of us. I could probably go on and on. It's just lots of different rabbit holes that exist out there, but it just has me wondering, yeah, all the fun things. Why are we here? What are we doing? And I can't help but just embed all of that to some degree in the artwork that I create.
I love that. You're exploring what it means to be alive and all these aspects of existing with oneself, within the world, with other people. It is very interesting that you bring up New Age spirituality, and then now science is able to prove certain things about it. I have heard about the telepathy tapes. I haven't heard them, but I have heard talk about it. Learning so much about the different ways that humans can actually communicate with each other. So that's really
Mm-hmm.
interesting. And I know that maybe your works don't necessarily go into that, but I love that those are themes that you explore while you're creating them.
I think
And
going back to the telepathy tapes too. I mean, there's one thing that they do discuss in there, and they talk about other people of now are starting to become telepathic by engaging with them, or they're like a parent or a teacher is able to telepathically communicate with these children. But first and foremost, there has to somehow kind of be the belief that you can do it. And so I love that and how that opens up the door to that. A lot of times it's our own self-limiting beliefs or beliefs that we have picked up from others, and it keeps us from existing in a big way, right? And so it's just kind of those overarching ideas that, again, that we are so much greater than what we give ourselves credit for, and that we are capable of so much more. All of that just completely fascinates me.
That kind of brings me to what we were talking about earlier, where even these little kids are already forming these ideas of what is real and what isn't real. And so they're seeing your works. And while there may be some works of yours that, because of the laws of physics, it might not happen, but there are some that I think like could, in a spectacular or just weird way of how life makes things happen, they could happen. They could be real. And I think it's interesting to think about how maybe these works do really talk about these like self-limiting beliefs that we have as humans, and how honestly we sometimes keep breaking that. Like at some point we thought, someone had a dream to fly, and then that's how airplanes were made. So
Mhm.
maybe it's more so on what we can really achieve. How can we push ourselves to go beyond the limits that like have been placed around us supposedly to protect us?
I think that's all valid too, because I mean, that's a common theme that shows up in my work, overcoming fear. I think fear is one of the biggest thing that keeps us rooted in this unfulfilling life. I mean, all the things that we want to achieve, but there's the fear of rejection, the fear of shame, the fear of failure, the fear of being unloved. All of these things kind of keep us still. But I'm just even looking at it on just a general level. So this is my fourth year, coming into my fourth year being a full-time artist. I am in my late 40s. It took me a long time to get here, even though I've always been artistically inclined, very creative from an early age. It wasn't necessarily encouraged for me to come out and pursue this life because there's that the stereotype that we're all going to be starving if we to live this creative life. And I bought into it. So even though I have an art degree, after I got out of college, I worked a bunch of other different jobs. A lot of it had nothing to do with art whatsoever. And I'm so grateful that I found a partner who encouraged me to actually like, this is something that you're really good at. Why aren't you doing this? And at that point started to believe in myself a little bit more that maybe I could. And so once I finally took that leap and then started to see all the things around me that I was capable of, it's just like, oh my God. But I had to overcome that idea that I wasn't going to make it, that it was a fool's journey to try to live a creative life, and that I was going to be hungry the entire time. So, and I think there's a lot of those beliefs that we get handed down, and whether it's societal or parental or something that we just pick up along the way, it's not easy to identify whether it's our belief or if it's been imposed upon us. The fear is just, gosh, I have this quote that's actually on my computer that says, "Everything you ever wanted is on the other side of fear." And
Oh,
it's just that
yes.
reminder to step outside of it and take a chance. And what's the worst that could happen? The other fun quote that I actually tied to a title of my artwork, and I always mess this one up, but it's like your freedom is waiting for you on the eastern breeze. What if I fall? Oh, but my darling, what if you fly? And so Aaron Hansen was the one that said that. I mean, what are we here for, right? That we're here to live this life that's supposed to be meaningful in some way or another. I would be more afraid of the regret at the end of the day of not having tried, not having done anything than the fear of failure.
It is so liberating just to like hear you say all of that. I think that we often get stuck in that I have to make money to be able to survive mentality, that we do become really afraid. As someone that also studied art, it is that fear of if you really go in there, and you immerse yourself fully in this world, all that you hear is you would only get famous after you die. That's what usually happens. And then once I started working in galleries and I started meeting all of these artists, I'm like, okay, that was a lie. That was a very big lie. It's just about putting yourself out there. You're absolutely right. There's a lot of fear that is holding us back. And it's just like, what's the worst thing that can happen? The worst thing that can happen is that all you have is a life full of regrets because you never really got to do what you wanted to do.
J.K. Rowling that had submitted her Harry Potter book to something like 16 different publishers before one finally said yes. Can you imagine if she'd quit at number 15? I mean, and we would not get the glory that is the Harry Potter series. So there's also something to be said for perseverance as well too. But going back to living the creative pursuit, I do have parents that will come up to me at these art festivals and will tell me that they've got a kid that really loves art and wants to make a living, but they have no idea what to do, how to go about it. So they ask, would you mind if they contact you? And I always say yes, because I want to help eradicate that starving artist myth out there too, but they never follow up. And I think there's some fear in that as well too, right? But for myself, looking back, like if I had had the inclination to say, or to at least have somebody say, listen, yes, okay, you want to be a creative. I understand. Absolutely. Let's do this. Recognize though that it's not going to be easy necessarily. Let's find you a mentor that can help guide you along that way. Recognize that you're likely going to have to work one, maybe two other jobs while you're also trying to get yourself in the door in this creative path. And that's okay too. It's like looking at all the celebrities that are out there, right? They were all working at bars and doing other things before they finally made it in that way. So there's no shame in that. There's absolutely no shame in trying to do all these different things. But that it is possible, that it can be done, and let's help you get there, instead of just shattering your dreams from square one. That's my note to everybody out there that has a kid that wants to live that creative life. It's just like help find them the right people to talk to, so that way they can R&D, rip off and duplicate, and then they don't have to reinvent the wheel for themselves. They can see what's working out there.
We've been talking a lot about what your work is about and the ways in which there are certain ideologies or emotions that you have been able to portray. One question I'm very curious to ask is, has there been any idea or emotion that you really wanted to put together in an image that you just have had a really difficult time finding a way to visually put together?
Yeah, that is a really good question. So yes and no. I have a couple of different ideas, and I think that they're fairly successful, although there's a part of me that just feels like it's a little lacking. So going back to these whole meditations, and you hear about these Buddhists that will often, especially as they age and get near the end of their life, that they start experiencing these kind of out of body experiences. And they do this as practice. And so that way, when it's time for them to move on, that they can help direct their consciousness when it leaves the body, right? So I have never been gifted with one of these experiences, although it's not for lack of trying. But I have had some really powerful meditations, and some where they get really out there. I ended up writing a blog about one of them too, where I ended up kind of in the ether, staring at what appeared to be like the most beautiful galaxy system and everything. And it's to this day the most powerful meditation I think I've ever experienced. And there was a wave of this unconditional love that just hit me in the chest and made me cry in that moment. And it was just so beautiful. So I have since tried to recreate that. And I think it falls short because it just doesn't completely convey that feeling of love that is it doesn't, I don't know, somehow doesn't transcend through the artwork itself the way that I experienced it. And then the other side of it too, I mean, the other visual aspect of everything that I experienced at that moment is it's not so easy to create. And so yes, we talk about surrealism, but I'd venture to say that the work I create is a little bit more rooted in magical realism. Yeah, there's magical or fantastical elements, but there's still a natural or kind of everyday aspect to the work that I create, where, like you were saying before, you go in, it's like, oh yeah, so this feels like it could happen, right? So if I start throwing myself out into a galaxy in outer space, then all of a sudden you completely lose that essence of the everyday, the essence of something that's natural to some degree. And and I think I would lose my viewer into being able to associate even more with the emotion that I'm trying to convey, if that makes sense.
It totally does. I mean, having an out of body experience and feeling all this like love in the world that's completely enveloping you in it, I feel like that makes sense that it would be something that's really hard to convey. And I think it's also because we all experience love in such different ways. So I think if you had that experience and other people around you never have, how do you really show that to them in a way that they can understand it? It's really cool that you were able to have that kind of experience, and please send me that blog. I would love to
I
read
will
it.
definitely do that. Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
so it's interesting that you're talking about meditation and how that has appeared in your work. Have you had any dreams that have had a similar impact?
I wish that I could say yes. I used to be a wonderful dreamer. I could lucid dream like nobody's business. I could drop myself into a dream exactly where I wanted to be from a previous night and then continue on the story. I could fly, I could hover, I could soar, I could do all of those things and I remember them. They felt so real. But somehow, and I'm not sure if it's just adulthood or everyday life or what have you, but I feel like I've kind of lost that ability and I've been trying to get back to it. So I would say, no, none of these are really based on dreams currently. So going back to magical realism and surrealism, at the root of surrealism, it's all kind of that Freudian aspect of the unconscious mind, and most of them were always engaging in aspects of dreams within their work. But I go back to Rene Magritte, who again is my favorite surrealist, and his works at the end of the day weren't really dream oriented, if you will, either. They were kind of more just paradoxes and ways to get you to think about things a little differently. And I found this amazing quote from him that I had never seen before, but I'll read this to you. It says, I have no desire to express myself through painting. I want to put the spectator in a state of mind where they realize the world is a mystery. It's like, yes, yes, absolutely. I love that. I love the simplicity of Magritte too, where you knew exactly what to look at. There was a lot of just breathing room around the subjects that he was juxtaposing together, and it just allowed you to focus your thoughts and ideas around whatever message he was trying to convey.
I think I see that a lot in your work too, especially now that you're talking about Magritte. I asked you about the dreams to kind of go into that space a little bit more because you have a piece here that's called 20 Seconds Before Waking.
Hmm.
And it has like you and a leopard, and it's just like, oh, it's like really close to me. Like, am I gonna die? Can you tell me a little bit more about that piece?
First off, I'll give you a little background behind the location of it. So because I think you had asked me previously about how I combine images together. That piece was created from a trip to Namibia. So it was my first post-pandemic international trip. And oh my gosh, it was 15 days total. It felt like I was there for a month, but in a good way. I just couldn't get enough of everything. And so I photographed that out by a dead acacia tree in the desert of Deadvley, just this kind of iconic desert scene, just absolutely gorgeous. And we had this kind of fog that came in the morning, which was unusual for the desert that early. That started to lift as the sun came up over the sand dunes. The cheetah, though, I had photographed, I think, a week prior in one of the little reserves that they had. They unfortunately had to pull all the cheetahs aside so they wouldn't kill the livestock, and then the farmers wouldn't kill the cheetahs. So it was a way to help preserve them, but still heartbreaking that they had to be in an enclosure. But yeah, no, this piece, as I am trying and attempting to remember my dreams, it's kind of that thought of how we're most likely to remember things as if we are jolted awake in some way during that time, right? That's because if we're just kind of listlessly sleeping and turning over and then kind of moving from one dream to the next, we're never really going to remember it. And then there was also was it Einstein? There was one famous scientist, it was probably Einstein, that I believe is either maybe him or Edison, would go to sleep holding something in their hand. And so, because they would often get these wonderful dreams where they were learning or overcoming an issue or a problem that they were trying to deal with in real life. And so, if the ball dropped out of the hand, it would startle him awake and he would remember whatever it was that he had learned in his dream and try to then move on from there. And so, this is kind of playing a little bit along those lines of being woken awake into the ability of being able to remember the dream.
I see that and I like that. I like that as a concept of just exploring how in our dreams we tend to not even remember. I don't know, like me personally, sometimes like I'll really want to remember a dream I had after I wake up. For some reason, after I wake up, I immediately forget. So maybe I'll try holding
Mhm.
something so that I jolt myself awake. How was that being your first trip after COVID and seeing just so much natural world and animals?
It was amazing. It really was. I was actually supposed to go to South Africa in either April or May of 2020, and obviously we know what happened there. And then this is when I still had a previous job too, and I found out one of my coworkers was going to go to Namibia after the conference out there in South Africa, and he was just a really amazing landscape photographer. So I started inquiring, like, why do you want to go there? What's there? And that's when I came across both the deserts, but then also this place called Kolmanskop, which was an old abandoned diamond mine that had been occupied by the Germans in the early 1900s. And after everything happened, they vacated the area. The sand has been blowing into those spaces for close to 100 years. And so that in its own right was just so very surreal and just kind of beautiful, and elements of what had been are now being swallowed slowly by nature. And then the wind blows really strong off of the Atlantic. It sits about 15 kilometers or so off of the Atlantic, out in the middle of nowhere. And so the winds are constantly blowing and then creating the ripples in the sand, even in the houses, inside the houses. And so I just love how that's kind of a metaphor for time as well too. I had a field day in both of those places. It was so much fun. And yeah, I'm sure there'll be more work coming out of that experience.
So I already asked you about one of the works in the exhibition. The other one that you have is underwater flight. And
Mhm.
I do see water often in your works. I do want to ask you personally, what do you feel that water as part of the language that you have created in your work kind of signifies?
Great question. Water, I think, is this kind of universal conduit for everything living on this earth needs it to survive, right? We can't go very long without it. I also kind of fascinated by some of those little connections that exist out in nature. The earth is approximately 70% water, 30% land, and our bodies are also about 70% water and 30% tissue. So that just seems too perfect to be a coincidence. So looking at things like that, in this sense, I use clouds quite a bit too, but the water is, if you're standing in a river, the water that is rushing past you is never going to be the same water that rushes past you the next second or the next second after that. And then there's just kind of some grounding element to it as well too. It always flows, it always kind of reminds you that in order to exist in some kind of harmony, you have to also maybe surrender to the flow. So there's a lot of different aspects around it. It's just a super healing state that is necessary for us in all existence.
I completely agree with you, and I have always seen water the same way. It's like this conduit for everything.
Also, especially because gravity does exist when we are on land, but that being in water, and I used to do this when I was a kid all the time. We had a pool in the backyard. I would always pretend that I could fly while I was in the water. And so you've got the buoyancy that takes place, and you feel a little more free in that sense. I mean, never mind that you're underwater and you still have to come up to breathe, but for those moments that you are just there and existing, you feel like you can fly. I can only imagine what those free divers that can hold their breath for a ridiculously long amount of time. Just what a beautiful experience that must be to be flying underwater.
So let's go towards this last question that I'm gonna ask. Your work transforms ordinary moments into something magical. What do you hope people notice or feel when they look at your images?
Perhaps a sense of hope and freedom. I also, through the stories, try to, I guess, just be honest about a lot of different things, whether I'm trying to talk about fear or this sense of escapism, but the idea, again, that we can fulfill something that perhaps we've been told is impossible. And so I really try to open up that door for conversation with people to let them know that there is a possibility that we can achieve all of those things, that this life is more than just a 9 to 5 job that we rinse and repeat every single day. Um, and I do think that, especially in this Western world, that this something is kind of ingrained in us at a very early age too, that this whole process of what the things that you must do in this life in order to achieve success. But that success is usually tied to this more capitalistic view of the world or of just needing things in order to show some status level, right? But I think success is more in line with happiness, with love, with connection with other people, with fulfilling something that is not necessarily tied to how much money we have in our bank account. And so I really am hoping that that's the feeling that comes out when people are in the presence of the work.
Thank you so much for such a lovely talk. And I genuinely am looking forward to seeing so much more of your work and anything that you have coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun. And thank you for allowing me to express some really out there ideas as well too.
We work in art. Is there really such a thing as an idea that's too out there with everything that's
That
going
is
on?
That is a wonderful, wonderful point you make there. Absolutely. We are the rule breakers of the bunch, right? Even with what I do and what I create, it's kind of funny because there are, especially when taking multiple different elements and bringing them together, there are guidelines. It's like I don't like to call them rules, but there are guidelines in order to creating photo montages that look absolutely believable. But it's just like rules, no, we're the ones that are constantly breaking those, redefining what normal is and pushing those boundaries. Thank you.
So, of course, and thank you again, Marisa. And for anybody that did join us in this podcast, please make sure to check out our website for more information on the exhibition and for more information about Marisa. And thank you so much. Until next time.